Hello everyone. So welcome to the first video in the series. As I mentioned in my introductory video, we are going to focus first on phase 3 clinical trials, and then we'll move on to other phases of clinical trials and other types of clinical research. But just to give you some introduction, what is a phase 3 clinical trial? Clinical research can happen in different ways. One is observational research, where you don't do any intervention, but you observe what is happening. And these are the type of population-based studies, the registration-based studies, or the case reports, things that you observe and draw inferences on. And we can talk about it in detail in the future, but I want to start with phase 3 clinical trials because that is what is changing our clinical practice most often. And once we finish that, we can move on to other types. But just to give you an idea, though there are observational types of studies and there are interventional type of studies. In interventional study, you actually intervene and you want to measure the effect of the intervention. And when that intervention is in the form of a new idea, it could be a new product, it could be a new innovation in terms of surgery, it could be a new device. So if you are experimenting it, then it is a clinical trial. So a clinical trial is a clinical research, an interventional type of clinical research on human subjects. So clinical trial fundamentally or classically can run from phase 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So phase 1 is the first phase of the clinical trial that is actually done in human beings. And then we go to 1, 2, 3. Phase 3 is also usually randomized. So whenever we are referring to randomized controlled trial, it's usually phase 3 randomized trials. And then phase 4 is post-marketing, post-approval, sort of real-world collection of evidence. So we'll skip phase 0 and phase 4 for now. Phase 1 is first in human studies. Just to give you a brief idea, again, we'll touch these in detail in future videos. So phase 1 is when we're using the drug for the first time in human beings. So what do we want to see when we are using a drug for the first time? First, we want to make sure that we are not harming people. That means we want to make sure that the drug is safe. So phase 1 clinical trial is fundamentally answering the question, is this drug safe? Can we continue to use this drug? So phase 1 classically does not tell you about whether the drug is a good drug, whether it is effective or not. In phase 2, once we have proven that the drug is safe in phase 1, we take it to phase 2, and in phase 2 we ask, does this drug actually work? And what that means is, for cancer, does it shrink the tumor, for example? So in phase 2, we are not asking the effectiveness of the drug in terms of what we already have. So we are not comparing it with anything. So phase 1 and phase 2 are classically single-arm trials. So we are just asking, does this drug work or not? Does it do the thing that it has intended to do? Does it shrink the tumor? And once we have proven that, yes, it does shrink the tumor, then we take it to phase 3. And in phase 3, we ask the most important question, okay, it shrinks the cancer, but is it better than what we already have? And that's where the randomized controlled trial comes into play. So if you look at the journey of a cancer drug development, only 4% of the drugs that have started in phase 1 actually succeed in phase 3. So the success percentage is pretty low. So out of 100 drugs that start in phase 1, only 4 of them become successful after the phase 3. So most of the drugs, they fail in phase 1 and then they fail in phase 2. But in phase 3, and I guess it's understandable because phase 3 is a randomized trial and we do a randomized trial when there is clinical equipoise. So almost 50% of the trials, they fail in phase 3. And if we look at the cost of these clinical trials, the cost increases proportionally. Phase 1 trial costs the least amount of money, and phase 2 costs even more, and phase 3 costs the highest amount of money. So a drug failing at phase 3 is also a financial disaster, in addition to being a bad news for science and bad news for patients. And if you look at the sample size, which is the number of patients that are enrolled into these trials, a phase 1 will have very limited number of patients because we are testing a drug, a brand new drug for the first time. We don't know whether it is safe or not. So after that limited sample size, in phase 2, when we are testing whether the drug works, we have a larger sample size And then in phase 3, we have an even larger sample size. So the sample size increases from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. So what I have just described is classical cancer drug development. In modern times, sometimes these things have become a little more complex to understand, and we'll touch those special cases after we have completed our discussion on phase 3 trial. But just to give you an idea, sometimes what is happening nowadays is there is seamless trial design. That means phase 2 and phase 3 can be combined. Instead of doing 2 separate trials, the trial starts with phase 2, and if the response is good enough, then it automatically, the same trial moves on to phase 3. And sometimes there is phase 1 and phase 2 that are combined. Once you measure the safety, there is no reason not to measure the response in those patients as well. So why to lose that data of efficacy from the patients who have been enrolled in phase 1? So they can also contribute to the phase 2 data. So there is phase 1 to phase 2 seamless transition trials as well. And also in terms of regulatory approval, classically drugs are supposed to be approved after showing that they are better than what we already have, which is a phase 3 trial. But nowadays, as you all know, in oncology, we have seen several drugs that are approved on the basis of phase 2 trial itself. So which is a change from the classical paradigm, and we'll discuss about it in the future. But we also have some drugs that are approved on the basis of phase 1 itself. And these pivotal phase 1 trials that have led to approval, they defy some of the norms of phase 1 trial that we just discussed. For example, they enroll a larger number of patients than what a classical phase 1 involves, so that it is good enough for regulatory approval. So this is just to give you a background on the different phases of clinical trials that we have. In future videos, I'll focus mostly on phase 3 clinical trial, and I'll start with if I get a phase 3 clinical trial report, how I go about reading that report. How do I start? Right from the title and abstract, we'll go all the way to conclusions and conflict of interest and even supplementary appendix. And this is an important point to understand, because many important information can actually be hidden in the supplementary appendix, but will be important for us to make correct clinical inferences. Thank you.